Every year has its canonical worst game of the year, which is more than often a title that just simply doesn't fit into the expectations of the wider AAA market, not to mention the mandatory performance issues that are patched months down the line. And frankly, I've spent my fair share talking about that genre of game. Marvel's Avengers, Saints Row Reboot, Ghostwire Tokyo, Resi 3 Make, Launch Day Cyberpunk, you name it. But man, 2024 Suicide Squad from Rocksteady is a different beast entirely. This isn't like those other games where their negative reception is often oversaturated at launch, only for the work to eventually be forgotten in the zeitgeist until it's later re-examined in a much fairer light, only for the whole cycle to repeat once more. I'd say that the response to Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is much closer to The Last Jedi, where it's characterized as a greater cultural failure than just simply being bad. It's not just a dev studio simply missing this time, it's a sign that the industry is somehow getting worse. You can tell by just how much it's become the norm to shit on this game. If you randomly choose a comic book or gaming adjacent YouTube video that's released since January of last year, chances are there's going to be some sort of jab at just how bad Kill the Justice League is. It's become yet another bludgeoned dead horse in a cottage industry of capital G gamers talking online about games that they hate, yet lots have never ever played. Spoilers, that's usually how these things go. So just keep that in mind for whatever game gets put on the sacrificial altar this year. And so I did the thing that I usually do. I took advantage of the staggeringly low winter sale price and played through all of Suicide Squad's main story and some of the DLC without seeing any reviews or opinions first, and boy, most of the discussion around this doesn't even scratch the surface of what's right or wrong with this game. Kill the Justice League is an overcomplicated mess of mechanics and ideas that I could enjoy at times, while simultaneously being a manifestation of the problems plaguing AAA games and even Warner Brothers, not just as a game publisher, but as a company. However, it is going to take some time to get to that conclusion. Man, let's talk about that tagline first. Kill the Justice League. It's a bold one. But I'll tell you, it's not helping DC's evil Superman reputation. The entire premise of the game is set up in the reveal trailer. Brainiac is taking control of the JL and is using them to conquer the Earth, starting with Metropolis. So Amanda Waller sends in the Suicide Squad to initially just help the surviving members until it's revealed that the only way to stop them is by killing them. What the fuck happened to my voice there? Holy shit. As a setup for a superhero video game, it's pretty interesting. As exhausted as I am of evil Superman and evil superheroes as a concept entirely, and as convoluted as the story gets lore-wise, I think that fighting off an evil Justice League as a group of heroes with little to no powers is a fun concept that manages to differentiate itself from most of the other superhero games releasing nowadays. And in terms of gameplay, it allows for lots of creative boss fights where the odds are not in the player's favor at all. It gives the story a sense of stakes and makes the squad out to be underdogs. And as much as I'm not a multiplayer guy, it makes sense why it would have to be a 4v1 when we're talking about 4 regular people fighting a fucking alien. I get that some people hate the squad being used in these sorts of stories, complaining about power scaling or whatever, but that stuff has never bothered me at all. The majority of the characters in this game are wearing spandex and armor, and one of them is a super shark. I don't really give a fuck about whether or not they would realistically beat Superman in a fight. I liked the story's fitting comedic tone. I think the squad's banter was overall pretty well written, even if some of the dialogue is a bit on the nose. Thankfully, all 4 of them aren't talking over each other the entire time like they are in the Guardians game. However, one of the things that game does best is how cohesive the team ends up feeling. And that's something that I think Suicide Squad tries to do, but ultimately fails. It very much feels like 4 people just walking in the same direction from beginning to end, which isn't a huge issue since I still liked all the main characters individually. Lore concerns aside, it's nice to finally see Arkham renditions of the Justice League. I also loved all of their characterization in this game. There's no real time spent with any heroes pre-Brainiac turn save for the Flash, who does come off as a little generic, but is the Injustice League. The game doesn't call them that. That's my name for them. They all bring a good antagonistic edge to the game. They even have a stronger presence as villains than the main antagonist, Batman taunting and mocking Harley the entire time, Green Lantern being labeled as a cop, the Flash's cartoonish bullying. His villain scenes were my favorite, man. It's all great. The only one who gets severely underutilized as a villain is ironically Superman, the one character who's made evil like all the fucking time. But I do appreciate that this game holds him as an ace up its sleeve until the third act. His fight with Diana across Metropolis felt very grand and gave her a fitting end. Yeah, R.I.P. Wonder Woman, I guess. Nolan North kills it as an evil Superman. It's a shame that his version of the character never gets many lines, but what he does get in this game is very good. His dialogue during his boss fight reads like an evil rendition of the legendary World of Cardboard monologue from Justice League, and I fucking love that so much. However, the problems begin to arise once Batman enters the picture, not because he dies like every other League member, or because the late Kevin Conroy didn't do great. I don't think that man could ever have given a bad Batman performance. It damn near feels like the character was made for him. Also, I love that the game ends on a tribute to him since he passed not long after finishing his lines. Rest in peace. No, my issues with Batman in this game is because, possibly due to publisher mandate and fan expectation, Suicide Squad is firmly set in the Arkham series. It specifically takes place 5 years after the ending of Night, where Bruce faked his own death and continued to protect Gotham with fear toxin. But in this game, it's explained that Batman eventually decided to join the League in Metropolis, which is all the background we're really given. Just from playing the game, you can tell that Rocksteady is treading a dangerous tightrope walk, trying their best to not step on the toes of their own previous games or anything else that might be developed by future studios, while also trying their damnedest to prevent a Last of Us 2 level of backlash, something you can't really prevent in this modern landscape. And while I'm about to criticize the hell out of this choice and all of the ones that succeeded, I will say that I liked some of the decisions that Suicide Squad makes as a follow-up to Arkham Knight. Harley feels like the same character while clearly having some off-screen development since we last saw her. Ivy being reincarnated as a plant child makes sense, and I don't think that it undermines her sacrifice in Knight at all. It's very much like Groot in the Guardians movies. The Groot from the first movie is dead. This new guy is kind of like his son. I don't mind that at all. And playing as a supervillain with Batman being an antagonist in his final appearance in this franchise is almost poetic. At least it's played up as his final appearance, but it's complicated. Having an entire sequence of seeing him actually use fear toxin gives a nice payoff to Knight's ending. The Bat Museum sequence is an amazing opening to this game, sending you through literal recreations of iconic moments in the Arkham games, as each of the 4 members of the squad are on the receiving end of a Batman stealth mission. It's my favorite sequence in the main story. It's so good. You can easily tell that this is one of the first sequences that came to the dev team's mind when making the game. It's that good. But while that stuff is great, I almost wish that this game took full advantage of its concept. Mainly since, as the story goes on, Suicide Squad outright introduces the multiverse and toys with the reveal that the League that you kill are actually clones. I get that rewriting stories and pitching changes in your reviews is a bit icky, but I almost wish that there was this big twist maybe halfway through that this Earth we're on is Earth 2. And there's actually some precedent for this in the story. In the opening few hours, there's tons of setup for a possible bait and switch. Captain Boomerang outright asks why Deadshot is black now, as opposed to his more pale complexion in previous games. Yet Amanda Waller is no longer played by CCH Pounder, and is now played by the great Deborah Wilson, and that's apparently just a normal change, I guess. Not to mention that the canon just doesn't line up with other Arkham spin-off material, but to be fair, this is something that's been happening since the beginning. ending, Asylum would say or set up something only for it to be completely undone in City. But honestly, I think that setting this story in an alternate world, one that's initially similar to the universe that we've played through before, a la Gotham Knights, would have saved writers a lot of headache. It wouldn't have stopped the backlash, but I do think that it would have given the dev team freedom to make radical decisions, as opposed to the constant concessions that the game makes with explanations that all the population isn't dead, despite there literally being husks around. Apparently that's just dead skin, or whatever the fuck, or the way that everything is just randomly undone at the very end, plus Suicide Squad being about a different Earth would have made for a great reveal. Maybe the Batman Museum's recreations could be slightly off, maybe a villain who wasn't supposed to be there is included, like, I don't know, fucking Condiment King in Arkham Asylum. However, what we got is sort of the video game equivalent to shoving things into your closet in order for it to close, crossing your fingers that it won't spill out the next time that you open it. The Arkham universe and its characters are crammed into a setting and a scale that I don't think entirely fits them. With Batman, his mischaracterization feels fitting since he's evil, but Deathstroke doesn't even feel like the same guy from Origins and Night, so why the hell does the game go out of its way to make sure that you know that this is the same guy from that other one? But more importantly, Rocksteady teases that the League that we fight and kill are actually clones. There's this bit early on in the story where Captain Boomerang cuts off Flash's finger when he's normal, only when he returns as a Brainiac minion, his pinky is back again. I initially pat myself on the back for noticing that little detail, only for me to complete the game and it's never brought up whatsoever by anybody. When I first began writing this review in December, the final DLC season hadn't been released yet. And now, having seen the reveal firsthand that yes, the setup of them being clones was true, I think that the ending is fine. Some people are going to swear up and down that this was a last-ditch effort to save face, and no, it wasn't. The story was always going to end with the Suicide Squad fighting alongside the living Justice League members. Not only is this twist set up with the Flash reveal, but it makes thematic sense as well. The Squad here are less bad guys than they are anti-heroes, and by killing their respective League rivals, it served as an end of their story threads before they ended up saving the world. So having the reveal that the turned members were simply clones that were all a part of Batman's plan, and the irony of having to work alongside the actual Justice League to finally stop Brainiac works for me. It makes sense as an ending. The issue, however, is that the only way to see the end of this storyline is to go along with a live service game. Again, outside of that one little hint in the main story, this is never revealed in the main game. The League being alive isn't this huge reveal that the DLC was built around like it seemed to be set up as. It comes off more like a random byproduct of the DLC. It's underwritten and it's very fucking weird. This all comes together to make the campaign feel like a mishmash of ideas that never fully get to come to fruition, which makes sense when you look at just how many development issues that this game had. Fucking hell, and I thought Final Fantasy 15 had a rough time, man. If you've been in the Arkham fandom for the past decade, then you know firsthand that it had been rumored for years that WB Montreal was developing a Suicide Squad game to build off of their post-credit tease in Arkham Origins from 2013. And apparently this is true. But that cancelled game and what we ended up getting are two entirely separate projects. See, while Rocksteady was making Arkham Knight, WB Montreal's Suicide Squad game was already in development. Except, and I shit you not, the fucking David Ayer's Suicide Squad movie released in 2016, yet another Suicide Squad project that was marred with interference from Warner Brothers, and surprisingly to everyone, that movie made a lot of money. Which made Warner Brothers panic a little bit, realizing that this property might be their new cash cow. I don't know, man, I'm not putting any money anywhere near Jared Leto's freak ass. You know, sometimes I forget that that movie exists, man. I am so ashamed of how much I loved that movie as a teenager. It doesn't help that WB Montreal were having their own woes with developing a Suicide Squad game, so Warner Brothers just ended up taking the project from WB Montreal and gave it to Rocksteady, who at this point in time had already released Arkham Knight and Arkham VR. Yeah, everybody forgets about that game. And we're essentially done with Batman. They'd finished their trilogy, and the team just wanted to start fresh on an original multiplayer IP, because in 2016 that wasn't too oversaturated just yet, except Rocksteady is a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. It's not clear in the Jason Schreier article I referenced if the studio declined making a Suicide Squad game, but I'm inclined to believe that once Warner Brothers mentioned to take that multiplayer spirit and merge it into a live service Suicide Squad game, it was very much a voluntold type of deal. And from there, the problems only grew. As the scope got bigger and bigger and the dev team grew, budgets also began to grow. But as the years went on, more and more live service games would release and very quickly die off. All the while, the developers at Rocksteady were essentially handcuffed to a sinking ship. I highly recommend that you read the Jason Schreier article for yourself. What's there is pretty telling. It's a story that we're all a little too used to hearing of publisher micromanagement and constant delays. One we've heard too much of, not just from the games industry, but from Warner Brothers themselves. If you've been a bit out of the loop, Warner Brothers are almost as infamous as Sony for swooping in to completely fuck with a project with incredibly impulsive decisions that usually end up ruining the results. And what was done to kill the Justice League is no different than what they've done to countless other films. And yeah, some of the problems are in the story, sure, but that's probably the best part of Kill the Justice League, problems included. No, the actual game is where this all gets the messiest that it could be. There's a severe lack of cohesion when playing Kill the Justice League, even down to the combat. Mostly since the game was originally going to center on melee, but shifted towards guns during production as a result of publisher mandate, confusing many devs, rightfully so, since some of these characters already have projectiles, and it just sort of leaves the melee weapon upgrades as a useless mechanic. This isn't Resident Evil where there's durability meters and parries. The melee is a one-hit stun, and that's about it. There was going to be a traversal system with upgradable cars and bikes, which sounds pretty terrifying after what happened with the Batmobile in Arkham Knight. In the final game, there's even an entire character in the story called Gizmo, where tinkering with cars for the squad is his entire purpose. But that system got scrapped during production, yet the cars are still in the fucking game. They're just repurposed into this pretty blah side activity. I can't stress enough that this entire string of missions is the same mission of just riding in a car with guns, copied and pasted. Vehicles don't change and neither does your objective. It's hell. Even just focusing on the final product, it all feels like a studio that's used to making one thing, single player story driven games that last no longer than 15-ish hours, getting shoved into making this other thing, a live service multiplayer game meant to be experienced and re-experienced for 60 plus hours. Lots of the game's bosses and objectives feel like they're built to be played once or twice, not upwards of 15 like you would in a multiplayer environment, which makes everything feel incredibly repetitive, and that's a shame because when Suicide Squad works, it's good. The set pieces or moments that decide to revel in the concept are great. I think the gameplay itself is overall pretty enjoyable. Like I mentioned, there's some mechanics that just don't need to be there. The random RPG numbers are bad. The enemies can be very spongy on normal difficulty. Properly upgrading your weapons feels like defusing a bomb, but the moment-to-moment combat, despite everything, was very fun. When played well, it's a very frenetic game that almost feels like an evolution of something like Sunset Overdrive, where you're constantly moving all across the map, trying to be a moving target. There's a sort of flow state that you can get into with this between the different kinds of traversal, the weapon variety, and abilities. It is a game that can be fun. It's just that there is so much going on all the time. If it's not useless mechanics and fake RPG bullshit you see in every AAA game now, then it's a bunch of particle effects all over the screen that just overstimulate you to all hell, or massive waves of enemies thrown at you over and over again, sometimes all at once. The open world is very disappointing because despite fully capturing that futuristic look from the comics while maintaining that Art Deco design of Gotham, is sort of wasted since the entire city is just a massive field for all of these repetitive side missions. Exploring Kill the Justice League's open world reminded me of Starfield, and if you haven't seen that review, it's not a good thing to remind me of Starfield. At times, this whole game feels like a mod to extend a pre-existing product just to make it longer. Does that make sense? It does to me. It probably took about 13 hours to complete the main campaign, but there's probably only about 9 hours of worthwhile stuff here. The structure of the campaign is very similar to the rest of the Arkham series, with the story often jumping from villain to villain, building up to the final confrontation. But it's just extended with a bunch of fetch quests and rescuing legacy characters like Ivy and Penguin, only for them to offer nothing to the story and even less to the gameplay, unless you take loot in a looter shooter seriously, like a freak. This is all clearly done because, like any other live service game, campaign isn't just a campaign, it doubles as a tutorial, meant to ease you into all these mechanics and activities that you're meant to get used to more often in post-game content. And oh boy, this is it, the bottom of the fucking barrel. I will be upfront and make it clear that I did not play all the DLC episodes. I played the first season to unlock Joker, and the final season to unlock Deathstroke, and to see the final cinematics. I did not play the second season with Mrs. Freeze, or the third season with Lawless, Deadshot's daughter. Frankly, because had I not been interested in Joker or Deathstroke, I probably would have put those down earlier and never returned, scrapping this video into the annals of my fucking PC. My therapist said that good things go first. So, I sort of love the way the Joker and especially Deathstroke play. Their traversal feels so different from what was already available with the main four, and in some cases, like with Deathstroke, they're so overpowered, and actively made the game 10 times more fun playing with them, which begs the question why it takes so long to unlock them, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I like the energy that these characters bring to the game, I just only wish that there were more cinematics with the DLC characters. It's a bit of a shame. I like that each season adds new Riddler races, mostly because it's just a chance for more traversal, and they unlock cosmetics, which are my favorite. The environment in the final season of a medieval metropolis was pretty amazing, although I wish it was taken advantage of just a little bit more. I wanted to fight Brainiac pretending to be Batman as a bard, or King Arthur as Green Lantern, and it's really about it for positives, mostly because the breadth of what's offered in these episodes is about as deep as a kiddie pool. The whole setup for the DLC is that the main game ends with a reveal that there's 12 more Brainiacs across the multiverse wreaking havoc, and we have to kill— what the fuck was that? And we have to kill them all in order to free the Justice League and to save each DLC character that said Brainiac is holding hostage. Except instead of new boss fights based on new characters, each episode is padded out with a rank level that can only be raised by completing missions. Missions that are exactly the same across all DLC chapters, and a rank level that resets for each DLC chapter, each of them ending with a boss fight that's taken from the original game. I think the intention was to allow each player to pick and choose what episode they do or don't want to play, which is why progression resets, and I do appreciate that. But it doesn't change the amount of time that I have to spend just to complete the same boss fight again in order to play as Joaquin Phoenix. I believe that the shortcomings of the DLC episodes are just disappointing across the board. Maybe Rocksteady was pressured to pad out the episodes a bit so the players are enticed to buy the new characters instead, each of which are offered for $10 each in the in-game store. However, even if that's the case, there is no reason that the episode should be this repetitive. You cannot realistically complete the episodes without some sort of exploit to get ranks as fast as possible, lest you burn yourself out. And even then, whenever you unlock a character, there isn't a sense of excitement for what's next, since you have to complete a majority of the additional content for that season in order to even unlock that character in the first fucking place. And even if you buy it, there's nothing new. It's the same shit, different day. Also, it's pretty scummy that the cosmetics you unlock for the DLC characters are mostly color palettes and not new costumes, which are also paid DLC.
Got my ass-kicking boots on, and boy, are they thirsty for ass.
The last fight with the final Brainiac clone is yet another copied and pasted boss fight, except this time he has 3 stages. One where he's the Flash, then the Green Lantern, then Superman, only to end with a comic cutscene where everything works out in the end. The League is alive, save for Wonder Woman, but I'm pretty sure she can come back to life. She's made of clay. They sell that shit at Walmart, it's not that big of a deal. The squad all decide to split and explore the multiverse on their own, while Amanda Waller has Brainiac in captivity, and that is the end of Suicide Squad. And I just sort of sat there, exhausted. mostly because it was like 4 a.m. yesterday morning. Over the past year, many studios that mainly release single-player prestige games have had their multiplayer spin-offs completely cancelled. Last of Us, God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, and even Cyberpunk. And while I'm kind of like the cancelled game guy, the cursed AVGN spinoff, I love looking through cancelled projects and wondering what could have been. I frankly, truly believe that these were all ultimately cancelled for the better. I get that I'm biased as someone who only enjoys single player, but even I can see the merits of a game like this. I like the idea of allowing a dev team to challenge themselves. The sense of community in online games is usually good, for the most part.
The fuck you say to me, you little shit!
And it's a shame to see any game cancelled, but I just don't think that the focus and work hours going into those projects would have superseded the fact that those games were mostly made for money, and not just launch money, but a consistent, never-ending cash flow. Gone are the days of a small-scaled multiplayer mode on a second disc. Now it has to be big, and it has to be profitable day one, and stay that way, or else you're fucked. And in an ironically competitive field, a publisher deciding to greenlight a multiplayer game is like a 25-year-old deciding to make a podcast. I say all this because I do legitimately think that this game being live service doomed it from the beginning. Doesn't matter how good of a dev team Rocksteady was and continues to be, this shit was built on pillars of salt and pillars of sand, let alone the fact that the studio making a multiplayer game at all was a challenge, making it a live service game in the year 2024 about killing fan favorite characters in a universe that's been running since 2007. It sounds like a humiliation ritual. That's not to say that I'd really lose sleep if these characters were killed. If that was their intention and direction, then I wouldn't really give a shit. I wouldn't like it, but I'd at least respect it. But it's frustrating to learn that internal feedback was so ignored and disregarded that it takes the game completely underperforming financially and for employees to be laid off for a publisher to finally ease off the live service trend. I think directly as a result of the failure of Kill the Justice League, Warner Brothers has announced that they'll only focus on 4 main franchises, with Batman being one of them. Not DC, Batman, because Rocksteady is already rumored to be making yet another Arkham game, because of course this show goes on, regardless of whether or not there's anything else that can really be squeezed from this universe. Of course, this project only comes after waves of layoffs for both Rocksteady and WB Montreal, who served as a support developer on Suicide Squad, just after having their original project just ripped away from them. If you couldn't tell, the layoffs severely impacted the DLC episodes. The final season had comic-style cutscenes, and while I do like a comic book-style cutscene, it's clear that these were not the original intention. I do think that this was always going to be the ending, but especially since it was implied that there were more voice lines from Kevin Conroy, only for none of them to be heard, I'm sure that these final few episodes were just not made to their full potential. And so the cycle ends the way it began, which is almost poetic in a really fucking depressing way. Thing is that WB Montreal's Gotham Knights was an adequate Arkham game that I liked, but it just didn't quite have the sauce. Suicide Squad has the sauce. There's still that Rocksteady flair, but all of that creativity and beauty is watered down by all this live service bullshit. So no. The game is not bad because Harley shoots a clone of Batman or because Wonder Woman dies. It's not good because it's unbalanced. It's unfortunately a subpar game because nothing was given enough space to breathe or time to be fleshed out. All of the fun stuff that this game introduces, like alternate Earths and grand scale villains, sort of fall on deaf ears. All of the good mechanics like traversal or combat are stifled out by drawn out horde modes masquerading as missions or boss fights dragged and dropped along the runtime. It is a compromised vision through and through, one that fully satisfies no one. Unless you did like it, I get it, I guess. I like the campaign well enough.
Him home, the very place he knows best. Oh. Become the Joker, exclusively on PlayStation 3. Rated T for teen.
PlayStation.